Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Strong Stoic Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Tumblin. If you listen to the audio version, man, that intro music is awesome, isn't it? What am I at? Episode 238 right now, and I still rock out to that intro music every time. So I hope you enjoy it because I spent a lot of time picking it out too, to be honest. Anyways, let's get on to the episode here. There's a presupposition to all self-help, self-improvement, and philosophy as a way of life ideas, and that is that growth is good. Growth meaning getting better, right? Self-help, self-improvement, after all, it is improvement of the self, though it's not necessarily just for the self. Even the philosophy of Stoicism presupposes that growth is a good thing. Their eudaemonic state is often described as something like flourishing, and flourishing you can imagine as a blooming flower. Now, what is a blooming flower? Well, it's one that has experienced a lot of beautiful growth. But it is interesting because we might ask, well, why is growth important in the first place? And how do we keep growing? I mean, certainly a rock doesn't care about growing, and it's part of the cosmic structure. So why is that even a necessary thing for us? Before I get into that, allow me to announce a couple of things for you, my dear listeners. If you heard the last episode 237, you'll be aware of the Seeker and the Stoic podcast, which is basically myself and Josh Bertolotti from In Search of Wisdom, where it's basically our conversations on philosophical ideas. It's really deep, it's really intimate, so please consider joining my Patreon to get access to that and also join my mentoring. I do want to push my mentoring just a little bit now because I am at a stage where I do want to take on a couple more mentees. And so if you're interested in getting mentoring from me, now is the time to do it. We're getting geared up for 2023. Now is a time where we're really starting to get and to get organized, I guess, to have a good 2023. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for that through my Patreon right now, and eventually that may be available through the Walled Garden. But at the moment, my mentoring is still available through Patreon, so consider going and checking that out. And that's actually all I'm going to announce today. So big thing is the Seeker and the Stoic, and also my mentoring. Now's the time to do it, man. We're getting really close to 2023. Why do we obsess over growth? I mentioned how we consider this quite a bit, even though things like a rock doesn't think about it at all. Consider how many self-help books there are out there, how many podcasts on self-improvement are popping up, and you can also look at how Stoicism is having a resurgence, along with, other philosophies. Buddhism had a big resurgence back about 15, 20 years ago, and then Stoicism is having it, I guess it started about 10 years ago as well, but it's still resurging. This isn't an arbitrary part of human experience, okay? Growth is absolutely vital, but vital for what? I preluded to this earlier that we have a lot of presuppositions, human beings, us Homo sapiens. We often take things as obvious. We take it for granted. However, if you take a broader look at the cosmos and nature, you'll see that a lot of the things that we take for granted, a lot of the presuppositions that we have, they're not as obvious as you might think. You don't see raccoons having a discussion on self-improvement after all. We can even go a step further. The one I used earlier is that you don't see a rock thinking about self-improvement. And a rock is part of the cosmos, and so it is part of the Stoic God, being nature in and of herself. So why don't rocks value self-improvement? Again, these are things that we seem to take as obvious. Like, of course you want to get better, but why? That's not an obvious answer. And probably you're thinking, well, the reason we want to get better and rocks don't, or raccoons don't, is because we are human beings and we are not. And that's the correct answer, but it really begs the question, what does it mean to be human? Now, I've dug deep into this topic before, but I'm going to touch on it because there's some really important elements here that's interesting. I think it's been a while since I talked about this as well. If you ask Carl Jung, he would say that consciousness is what makes us human. That is being conscious, being aware of our vulnerabilities, that, we have the potential to die, we have the potential for mass suffering and pain. And so consciousness, our awareness of this, is what makes us human beings. But it's also awareness of our capacity for good and evil. Again, to throw in a very Carl Jung shadow, pun intended, to this discussion here. So our awareness that we can suffer and die makes us vulnerable, That is our vulnerability, and our awareness of that fact is what makes us conscious, and that is what makes us human. In Genesis, in the Bible, there's an interesting scene where Adam and Eve first become conscious. And they were naked, of course, running around in the woods as all pre-conscious people did back in the day. And when God granted them consciousness, he basically, gave them embarrassment. They looked down and they saw their parts and they said, "Oh my God, I am embarrassed about this. I better cover that up." And so the first thing they did was cover up their organs, let's say. And that's not obvious. If you think about why we put clothing on, a dog isn't concerned about you seeing him naked, nor a cat, nor a hamster. They don't care. I mean, they'll clean themselves right in front of you. There's very obvious about that for anyone who's been around cats. This was in many ways, that being Adam and Eve putting the leaf over the organs, that was the start of culture because they immediately covered up, and that's clothing. And clothing is a part of culture. And what does culture do? Well, according to the Taoists, the culture is part of order, and order gives us structure, and it protects us despite our vulnerabilities. And so that's what culture actually is. What makes us human? What else makes us human? So that's kind of a Carl Jung / biblical idea. If you ask Mircea Eliade, this is a guy who you might not recognize his name, but he studied and wrote a lot of books on the history of religions. More than anyone, he's very, very, very knowledgeable and just has really given back to this academic community. He'd say that standing upright makes us human. We share a common ancestor with other primates, but other primates such as gorillas and chimpanzees, they actually hunch over. They're very hunched over. They normally walk on four arms / legs, I guess. But we as human beings, we stand upright. We expose ourselves. In fact, standing up straight is something that you have to remind yourself of because we have this natural tendency to hunch over and protect ourselves. But why do other primates do that? Well, they do it because they're trying to protect their organs, their actual organs, their heart and their stomach area. So when they hunch over, that is a form of protection. But us human beings, no, we have to be vulnerable, so we open it up and leave it exposed for everyone. They're protecting their vital organs because they don't want to expose them to potential predators. But no, we don't do that. In fact, that's why heart-to-hearts exist. If you think about what a heart-to-heart is, it's when you're opening up to each other. It's when you're vulnerable. And so that's what that is. Having a heart-to-heart is standing up straight, is letting your vulnerable part show, which is your heart and your bodily organs as well. And that makes you vulnerable. And that's what a heart-to-heart actually is, exposing your vulnerability. Now, this idea, of course, ties in with Carl Jung's idea about vulnerability, obviously, as I just mentioned there, because standing upright is accepting that vulnerability, and that's really what a philosophy as a way of life was. And that's where I'm going to go to with this next, because there's one final piece to this puzzle, something like Stoicism. Stoicism deems our rational mind as a thing that separates us from the rest of the cosmos. You're probably tired of hearing me say that. But, of course, it acknowledges that the cosmic structure is built on rationality. But I'm not going to delve too deep into that. But I want to make it clear that this may seem like a separate idea from that of vulnerability, but it's actually not. They're deeply connected. And the reason is because, as I mentioned in a very recent episode, Stoicism exists in the first place because of our knowledge of vulnerability, of our vulnerability. It exists for that very reason. I explore this idea deeply in a recent episode, so check that out if you're interested. But the basic idea is that life is suffering, as the Buddhists knew for a very long time, and other religions knew as well, but that we can transcend that suffering with the rational mind, or in other words, with a philosophy as a way of life. Through reason and perspective, we can transcend our fear that comes from the knowledge of our vulnerability. So there's alignment here, even though it's complicated. I suppose you could say that it's the same fundamental problem, but that you're looking at it from a different angle. Long story short, what makes us human is consciousness and our acceptance of our vulnerability, or I would even say our ability to accept our vulnerability and transcend the suffering that is life. But let's try and tie this back in with growth and why it's important. We are vulnerable, and we know it. That's what makes us human. By adopting a certain way of life, a certain philosophy as a way of life, we can cope with this vulnerability. But here's the kicker. Here's the challenging part. A way of life isn't just a set of ideas on a piece of paper. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is not a philosophy as a way of life. This is something that you have to embody. It's really a set of habits and practices that you have to do daily and regularly. This is one of the most crucial understandings that I think a lot of people miss. And that's why I say this over and over again. Virtue is a habit. It's what you do regularly. In other words, again, they are habits. What are habits, though? Habits are things that you practice every day. If you practice certain habits every day, you end up either getting somewhere better, getting somewhere worse, or staying exactly where you are. You can, after all, make your habits work for you or against you. You can choose to go to work at the same time every day, or you can choose to show up late every day. That's a choice you get every single day. And whichever one of those you feed the most, that becomes who you are. You become either the person who shows up late to work, or you become the person who shows up on time or early, whichever one you're practicing regularly. And whatever one you're practicing regularly, no one's going to care if you do something different every now and then. If you're coming to work, say 100 days in a row on time, and you're late one day, no one's going to really care. If you show up late every day and if you show up late every day for 100 days and then one day you come in early, you're going to say, oh, well, that was a fluke. Maybe he set his alarm clock wrong and doesn't realize that he's actually coming in on time for once. The point is that what you do every day is what actually defines you, and that's what a way of life is. You can have your habits work for you or against you. But this is one of the hardest truths to accept. I'm going to say this a couple times in this episode. You never actually get to where you want to go in life or in self-improvement or in Stoicism or philosophy as a way of life. You never actually get there. So thanks for staying with me so far for all this back knowledge. I don't know, what are we in here? Probably 10 minutes or so. 12 minutes, 13 minutes. But that back knowledge was really important because that allows us to get to the crux of the episode's lesson. You see, foolish people think that they will go to the gym, they'll get in shape, and then they'll stay in shape. They think that they can go on a diet for a month, and then they lose weight, and then they can go back to their, crappy original habits. They think that if they make themselves better, they'll get a partner, and they'll get married, and then they can just let themselves go and do whatever the hell they want. They think that they will find this state of happiness one day, and then life will be perfect after that. This is a fantasy. It's not real. It doesn't exist in nature, I'm afraid. We've known as a species for a very long time that happiness and meaning do not come with the attainment of a goal or a thing. Happiness and meaning come from the process of attaining that goal. As an example, I'm sure when you were going through high school, maybe you're still in high school, but maybe you think or maybe you thought that once you graduate high school, things will be perfect. Once I get that degree, once I get that diploma, I'm going to be okay. But what happens once you graduate? You're happy for like a day, and then you're left with the question, well, now what do I do? What job do I want to take on? What do I want to study after this? Here's another example. You order that thing that you always wanted on Amazon. You saved up your money, you ordered it, it's coming, it's going to take a few days, and you're checking that tracking day, you're checking it every day, see when it's going to come. Oh, it's still on time. Oh, it's coming early, oh, it's coming late. But what happens when you actually get it? You're happy for like 10 minutes. And then you're back on Amazon looking for something else to order. The reason why growth is vital to the human experience is that meaning and happiness come not from having a full bucket, but from putting a single drop in that bucket every day. It comes from not finally getting that job you always wanted, but in focusing on doing your best at your work every single day, no matter what your job is, whether you're the garbage man or whether you're the CEO and everything in between. No one becomes happy from attaining a certain job. You become happy by fully engaging in that process of improvement. And this leads to the crux, the main crux, the point I want to really highlight in this episode. One of the hardest truths of life. Life must be lived under tension. You don't flourish by being strong. You're not happy by being strong. You flourish by getting stronger. And how do you get stronger? Well, by carrying a load. We all know this in the gym, right? As many of you know, I do Olympic weightlifting. That sport is infamously known to be hard on the knees. Like many weightlifters, I struggle with this. I have regular knee tendonitis, which essentially means I have achy knees. It turns out that muscle stretches more than tendons. Tendons are what connect your muscle to the bone. Not going to get too deep into physiology here, but I am a big nerd about this. But because of this, because you basically have your tendon and your muscle, what happens is because your muscle is more flexible than your tendon, you have to train them in a different way. If you move too fast with a ton of weight, this is what weightlifting is. That's why everyone has knee trouble and joint trouble in weightlifting. The tendon can't keep up with the muscle, and that causes pain and eventually degradation of the tendon. The tendon becomes weaker. So what do you do in such a situation? Well, it turns out that there's a little trick you can do to make your tendon stronger. You can lift more slowly, or you can do some isometrics. You can really hold, for example, a wall squat or something like that. But the point is, if you want to make your tendons stronger, you have to put them under tension. And not just tension, constant tension. That's how you make things stronger. If you do that, your tendon is under constant tension, and that allows it to grow and become thicker and stronger. And it's the same way with anything in life, including virtue. If you want to become better, or in other words, stronger, if you want to carry a load, you have to carry a load. That load puts you under tension because you have to hold that weight. If it's too much, you will degrade. There is such a thing as overtraining. You'll burn out. You'll regress. You'll get weaker. But if it's not enough load, you see no growth whatsoever. However, if it's properly loaded, if you're taking on enough, you do become stronger, just a little bit more each and every day. And when you notice that, when you see yourself on the road of improvement, getting a little bit better each and every day, that's where you find meaning and happiness. It's not in achieving anything. It's in moving from A to B. It doesn't give me joy to say any of this, really, because, again, I do think that this is a very hard truth in life. But if you're not happy, if you're not fulfilled in your life right now, it's probably because you're stagnant. It's probably because you thought that once you got somewhere, you would be happy. Once I get that job, once I get that salary, once I get that house, once I get that car, once I get that partner, once I have a child, I'm going to be happy. That's not real. That's not true. What's my advice? Never, ever stop improving. Never, ever stop growing. Never, ever stop becoming stronger. Rather than shy away from the discomfort that comes from carrying a load, lean into it. Lean into it. Not too much. You don't want to fall over. You don't want to burn out. But what you do want to do is hold enough tension in your tendons, in your muscles, in your bones, in your soul, so that you can flourish. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. If you like this, consider checking out basically everything, but leave me a rating and review. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and all the social medias. There's episodes every Tuesday and Thursday if you're new here. Again, check out The Seeker and the Stoic. Go check that out. I'm not going to bug you anymore. Thanks again. Cheers. Until